Good evening, chaps. I have a great show for you this evening. So, I wanted to talk about who we should vote for, Democrats or Republicans. I want to talk about the benefits of either party and which party should get our votes. So, let's begin by looking at the positives and the negatives. So, I want to get this out of the way before I say anything. I think to a certain extent, both parties are evil. So, what does the Republican Party do? So, the Republican Party, I think their cultural to economic policies are hypocritical with each other. So, for example, what are things that Republicans support? Republicans are pro life. Um, Republicans are against contraceptives. Republicans are against pornography. Um, Republicans want Republicans want Americans to marry while still in their youth. All of these are good things that Republicans should be very proud of, that we should celebrate Republicans for. But where does the hypocrisy come in? So, on the economic policies, Republicans and Democrats push these policies too, but Republicans push them a lot harder. Um, they support Ayn Rand style capitalism, which has made a lot of these things impossible. For example, in the 1950s, you could support a single income household with 10 children, a nuclear family with 10 children with a single income at a blue collar job. That would be impossible to do now. In the 1950s, the average American could support a big family on a single income at the average job. That's obviously impossible now. Um, because of this, women are economically forced to join the workforce. And a lot of Republican economic policies also make it a lot harder to have children. For example, uh, they are the off. It's usually Republicans that are arguing against stuff like food stamps, a welfare state, um, or social security programs. All of these things that make it a lot easier for women to have children. Um, so and these are good policies. Don't kill your own children. Start a family. Marry while still in your youth. Don't look at pornography. These are all good things. But a lot of Republican economic policies make it hard to be good. But let's compare this with Democrats. And also, before I get into this, Democrats sometimes make being good hard too. For example, they support open borders for the US. And you can either have a welfare state or open borders. You can't have both. So if you support open borders, like as Democrats do, then that makes it very difficult to have a welfare state. Impossible, actually. And if you don't have a welfare state, then that makes it a lot harder to have children while in poverty, making it more tempting for women to murder their own children while they're still inside of them. But that's the least of the Democratic Party's evils. So, what are things that Democrats support? Sodomy, pornography, homosexuality, transvestitism, cross-dressing, and pushing all these degenerate evils on children, very small children, and many others, feminism, all of these different degenerate ideologies and degenerate things. And what do Democrats do? They make these things a lot easier to access. So the Democrats were the ones that uh, overturned the Supreme Court's ruling or instituted a Supreme Court ruling that anti-sodomy laws were unconstitutional. Homosexuality was originally illegal in the US, but it was Democrats that changed that and legalized it in the US. Um, Democrats are doing all these things to remove these social stigmas around homosexuality and transvestitism, trying to make it socially acceptable to become a homosexual or a transvestite, um, and making all of these things more accessible. They have made, quite frankly, um, I quite shockingly good, I guess, strides as far as a strategical stance of accomplishing their goals in these issues. So, what's a big difference between Republicans and Democrats? Republicans ask you to be good and then make it hard to be good. Democrats ask you to be evil and then make it easy to be evil. I think it could be very easily argued that both of those things are evil, but obviously the Democratic stance is a lot more evil. The Democratic Party is a lot more evil than the Republican Party. So while I have big major problems with both parties, I do think on that stance we should vote Republican. Now, what about people who disagree with me on the my economic point of view and say that what Republicans do is going to make our economy better? So as conservatives, we oftentimes look to the 1950s or the mid 20th century as a time of great social standing, when everything was so great. But we must remember that a lot of this time had very strict economic structure and economic policies. Um, for example, they had an extremely high tax rate on the very, very rich. They had a lot of regulation on companies and big companies, requiring um, high wages and good retirement plans, those sorts of things. Um, and they had very high amounts of regulation on the housing industry to make sure the middle class had good access to cheap homes, cheap houses with big lawns, all these sorts of things in safe suburbs with low crime rates. Um, and a lot of this stuff was from FDR. Now, there's a whole lot of issues where I disagree with FDR, but on economic policy, FDR was pretty good. He wanted to change the Constitution to make it more for the working class. And FDR was all about helping working class Americans. And a lot of the policies he put in place is why the 1950s were such a great time period to live in. Um, And when did we start seeing this get worse? So we started seeing this get worse when we saw more Ayn Rand style capitalism and the neocon movement rise. So the first neocon president, Ronald Reagan, a lot of his economic policies are why the economy is so disgusting right now. In the 1950s, the economy was wonderful. Again, someone with a blue collar job could buy a big house in a safe suburb with a low crime rate, and have a big family with lots of children with a single income from a blue collar job. That's impossible in the 21st century. And that's largely because of Ronald Reagan's policies. These trickle down economic policies, these are what has got us to the point where that's now impossible. It's those policies that have made the future for us young people look so, so grim. Economically speaking, there's a million reasons why the future looks extremely grim for especially young white people, but it's awful in so many ways. So yes, and it's actually there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that the deregulation of Wall Street has made the economy worse. For example, George W. Bush deregulated Wall Street. Then we had a huge crash in the early 21st century that ruined our economy. So I think George W. Bush, another neocon like Ronald Reagan, made the economy much worse. Or another neocon, or Bill Clinton, he put in all sorts of deregulation and supported TFP and NAFTA, which gave all the American people's jobs to child slaves in foreign countries on the other side of the world. That made these issues a lot worse. So this is one of the biggest problems. Or sometimes there's certain issues that I look at and say, I don't think this makes me think maybe I shouldn't be voting for Mr. Trump in this November. But then on almost all the issues I can think of, Joe Biden has those problems, and on a lot of other issues, Trump is way better than him. For example, so the Palestinian genocide. I'm against the Palestinian genocide. Donald Trump supports the Palestinian genocide. Joe Biden is giving billions and billions of dollars to aid to Israel. He's giving lots and lots of weapons to Israel, lots and lots of bombs. He supports the genocide. Bad economic policies. Joe Biden has completely and totally folded to the neocons and their terrible economic policies. On economic issues, he has completely folded to the neocons. On a lot of cultural issues, he's way, way worse than the neocons. But on economic issues, he's folded to the neocons. And there's or corruption. Joe Biden is making deals with all sorts of giant companies. Joe Biden is in bed with these multi-billion-dollar international companies, these global hegemonies. So almost all the big problems I have with Trump, Joe Biden has those problems. But let's talk about Trump outside of his biggest problems. So on changing the political sphere, Donald Trump made serious changes to push the Overton window farther right wing during his 4 years in office. And if we reelect him, he'll push the Overton window much farther right. As a member of the, I guess you could say, far right wing, I do identify as far right wing. I absolutely love this. So this is wonderful. Trump is mainstreaming authoritarianism. I'm an authoritarian, so this is great. Trump is against abortion. So Donald Trump put three pro-life Supreme Court justices on the stand during his 4 years in office. If Joe Biden was president during that time period, or Hillary Clinton, or Barack Obama, they would have put three pro-abortion Supreme Court justices on the bench during those 4 years of U.S. presidency. So Donald Trump was able to do the great thing of overturning Roe v. Wade. And he has done wonderful things for the pro-life movement and for us pro-life people. As a Roman Catholic, this is deeply important to me, and I'm very glad that Mr. Trump was able to do this. So on the issue of abortion, Donald Trump is way better than Joe Biden. On almost all cultural issues, Donald Trump is way better than Joe Biden. There's a lot of cultural issues I don't like about him. For example, he supported homosexual marriage in 2016. That's bad, but Joe Biden is even worse on that issue. So on all of these different issues, uh, Donald Trump is better than Joe Biden, and all of the big problems I have with Donald Trump, Joe Biden has those problems, but worse. So, in conclusion, are there things about Donald Trump that drive me crazy? Yes, there are. But am I going to vote for him this November? Yes, I am. So I guess that's my takeaway for this upcoming election and for how we should vote. For those reasons I described to you, so I don't like the GOP. I I have a million problems with the GOP, but this November I'm going to vote for Mr. Trump, and I'm going to vote for all of the Republican candidates I can vote for. Um, in all the Republican judges, all the Republican senators, moving forward, because I just recently, so this the 2024 election is going to be the first election where I'm going to be old enough to vote. For those who don't know, I turned 19 last April, um, or this April. Sorry, but I couldn't vote in the 2022 election, but I can vote in this election. So I'm going to be voting in all the presidential elections. I'm going to voting in the midterms elections. I'm going to vote as much as I can, and every election I'm going to vote all Republican because they're the lesser of two evils, put simply. And if there's some really based people who aren't neocons but are real conservatives, and they have a problem with voting Republican because of they're Zionists or because they're anti-white and they support white genocide, or because they're go easy on homosexuals, whatever your problem is with the neocons, or because they have awful economic policies. They support foreign aid for Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan, and they want to do a million different wars everywhere. Um, just here's a piece of advice for why I think you should vote Republican. The Republicans have been getting progressively better since the election of 2000. So if the vote was George W. Bush versus Al Gore, it would be like, oh my gosh, this is so awful. But the vote between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, it's still, oh my gosh, this is so awful. But Donald Trump is better than George W. Bush. He's bad, but he's better than George W. Bush. And so I would have felt, I'm going to feel a little bit bad voting for Donald Trump, even though I'm going to do it. But I would have felt really bad voting for George W. Bush, even though I probably would have done it. So that's sort of where and Donald Trump in the 2024 is on cultural issues, at least, more based than he was in 2016 and 2015. So we're getting better. I mean, if you take the 2008 election, um, John McCain, that's his name, right? Um, he was awful. So so yeah, but I mean, Donald Trump is awful in a lot of ways, but he's better than that guy. So we keep getting better, and hopefully it won't come down. Hopefully, we're going to get the Republican Party to become an America First party, to become a truly based party, to stop being a neocon party and be a real conservative party. So then one day, not just I, but all of us can vote Republican and not see it as voting as the lesser of two evils, but seeing it as voting for the good, virtuous party, or perhaps the best of two good, virtuous parties. If the Overton window gets pushed really far right, Or ideally, we stop having elections because the government becomes truly based and red-pilled. Um, all right, I think I'm going to call it good for today's show. I'm hoping to do a show tomorrow evening as well. I'll see you next time. Good evening and God bless you.